What's up, guys, and welcome back to another episode of Spark to Fire. I'm your host, Landon Rhodes, and today we've got Mark Whitehead, the president and CEO of Whitehead Oil and U-Stop Convenience Shops. Mark, thank you for coming on today.
It's my privilege to join you. Thank you very much for the opportunity, Landon.
You bet. So, Mark, a lot of people in Lincoln really know you from your involvement in the community and just from Whitehead Oil and U-Stop Convenience Shops. I would just love to hear what were you like as a kid? What was your childhood like?
Well, I was. Some people would consider me somewhat anorexic. I think I've solved that problem throughout the years. I was a tall, skinny kid, and I just had a great. I would describe it as a privileged childhood. I had two of the greatest parents in the world, and we moved here when I was 3 years old, and that's when my father founded Whitehead Oil Company. When we moved from Hastings, my father, prior to that, had been working for 10 years with Phillips 66 out of Bartlesville, Oklahoma, and then driving the territory here in Lincoln after a very successful basketball career at the University of Nebraska as well. Mm-hmm. But anyway, that's the shadow that I had the opportunity to grow up in. I idolized my father very much. And mine was probably not atypical of an entrepreneur's son, part of an entrepreneur family, where that's what was discussed at dinner. Work was discussed at dinner. The culture was discussed at dinner. My father works 6 days a week, in addition to going in on Sundays as well. But it was an official 6 days a week, and I had the opportunity as a young youth to go in to the warehouse and build forts out of the car batteries that my father had back in the warehouse, and just had those great bonding opportunities that all revolved around the business. And growing up, I again idolized my father a great deal, and enjoyed watching him do what he did. By the time I was in fifth grade, I knew my multiplication tables, and as anybody can tell you, once you've got your multiplication tables down, there's not much you can't handle in the business world. So I begged my father at that point to let me start working summers, and I've worked every single summer since, really, for the most part, for Whitehead Oil Company, and it was just such a great privilege working side by side with someone like my father, and that was a great deal of who I was growing up. There were some ebbs and flows along the pathway here and there a little bit, but for the most part, that was pretty much the culture and pretty much the nature of it. I had the opportunity. My first job was working a half a day in a service station, washing windows. Could barely reach all the way across the windshield to be able to do it.
Yeah.
But pumping the gas, and then I got on my bike and rode down to the offices where I rode and made deliveries with our warehouse man to our dealers. Back then, it was 30 full-service dealer locations and
Wow.
only a couple of mini-serves. They didn't have self-service back then, but it was the nature of our business was almost 100% dealer-oriented, which is to say that the company owned the retail location and then leased it out to a dealer that operated it as their business, as an independent dealer operator. And that was the nature of the business. And that's still, even to this day, it's still a small segment of our operations where you don't see many traditional service bay dealers around. We've still got close to a half dozen of them.
Interesting. And was it always like that to where one person could have several locations, or was it one-to-one at one point?
The mindset of a dealer is very much one-to-one. Very few times did we have a dealer operate more than one location, and that's still the mindset today. Jeff Hillis down at Hillis 66 is an example. He's there from sunup to sundown, every single day, almost 6 days a week, and we get on him for not being open on Sundays, but it's not within his mindset to turn the operations over to somebody else to be able to operate the location when he's not there, because
Right.
he is that hands-on, and that's just the nature and the makeup. And I think most of our dealers are wired pretty closely to that. So
Right.
where we focus corporately on the used stops an awful lot, that's a different mentality.
Right. It's a different mentality. So talk about what are some things you specifically picked up from your dad as you're watching? I mean, you got immersed in an entrepreneurial empire really young. You got a lot of amazing experience. You said you were talking at the kitchen table. I can relate to that. I come from a family of farmers. So business, farm, culture, landlords, it was all discussed at the kitchen table. So I can relate there. But what are some other things you picked up from him as you were growing up?
Well, there were an awful lot of reflective moments. The one that you described was when I was a young teenager, and we were sitting in his office, and he just leaned back in his chair and he said, "Mark," he said, "we are in one of the most incredible businesses there are out there. We just get to have the opportunity to sell a product that almost everyone needs, and they need it every week. And we're in the retail business, we're in the wholesale business. We have different things come up every single day that makes every day unique. And having the opportunity to address those challenges and figure out how to make our business relevant, how to differentiate our business from all the other alternatives in Lincoln to make sure we stand out as a difference to the customer, to do that." And he did that an awful lot with his force of personality. He was a unique man in that he was tall, he was handsome, he was a basketball hero at Nebraska. He would walk into a room and command that room. I think all of us know people that have got that ability to do that instinctively, and people just liked to like him.
Yeah.
And it was interesting, and they just flat out wanted to do business with him. And I try to keep a very light personality, but I would not even begin to think that I've got anywhere close to the personality that he had. He, again, was able to command a room, and it was just fun growing up in that shadow, because every event we went to, every function, meeting, whatever it was, he commanded the room as soon as he walked in, and it was inspiring.
What did he do to command the room? I'm just curious, like what was that like? Is that walking up and shaking hands with 5 people in a room that he probably shouldn't even know anybody, but he did? That sort of thing, or what was it?
He did it. He did. He had a physical command in that, and he was 6'9", handsome, handsome man, 6'9". An awful lot of people knew him from his basketball career. He had a tremendous personality, incredibly gregarious, and you couldn't be around him more than 10, 15 seconds without smiling and just feeling comfortable in his presence. And that's what I remember an awful lot about him.
That's great. I love that. Something to think about as you guys, we have a lot of business owners and executives that listen to this show. Something to think about as you guys are growing your business is, how can I be more like that when I walk into a room? How can I be that calming presence, but yet, people just want to, like you said, to like you.
Right.
That's
it's instinctive, but at the same time, one of the greatest things that he taught me was to always stay present, always continue to figure out what you're going to do to differentiate yourself from the competition and to be relevant, and that's critically important. And no business ever figures things out permanently. The things continue to evolve. The reasons that people want to trade with you are going to continue to evolve.
Right.
And it is it's a scenario of trying to figure out how you continue to evolve and be relevant in the marketplace. If I was still 100% service station dealers, we wouldn't be around today.
Right.
We've thrown many different things up against the wall to see if they would see if they'd fit, but some do, some don't, and some of them are laughable.
Like what?
Well, the old days of service stations used to give away free items all the time. And you come in and buy a gallon of gasoline, or not a gallon, a tank of gasoline, and for you either get a free spatula or a grill thing, and you collect the whole grill set, it's of utensils or kitchen drinking glasses, and collect the whole set. And with every visit, you got another piece of it, and it was interesting. Grand openings were always a scenario where you got a free 6-pack of Pepsi or Coke, whoever we were working with at the time, just for coming in and filling up your car with gasoline. And you got to remember the beverage business was different back then as well, in that service stations were a go-to place for pop, and because they were in returnable bottles.
Oh, of course,
and
yes.
So you would load up your trunk in your car with the empties that you had from the house, and come in the full-service gasoline attendant would take the empties out and put the fresh case in the back of your trunk, and you didn't have to lift a finger, and that's just kind of the way that worked. Obviously now, today, you no longer have deposits on that, but and most of us gotten through grocery stores, but we sell our fair share amount in the convenience stores as well. But the funny thing about it, with the industry was clearly transitioning. My father was looking for that next great item, and so he made this huge deal on ketchup, little commercial bottles of ketchup.
Right.
And we didn't have a temperature-controlled warehouse. He just was under the mindset that a bottle of ketchup would last forever. And we bought this obscene amount of ketchup, and of course it didn't catch off quite the way we thought it would. And I don't think you're supposed to consume ketchup after it turns that much darker shade of red.
Became maroon at that point, yeah.
had an awful lot of it.
And yet here you are. I'm sure you had.
Yeah.
How long was that stuff sitting in your house after that point? Is the real question.
Exactly. But that's one that didn't work. The other, it was fascinating to sometimes see how his mind worked. He never did quite catch the concept. My father's been gone for about 10 years now, but about 30 years ago, when the concept of selling bottled water came up, he didn't get it. Why would somebody pay a couple bucks for a bottle of water that you get right out of the tap?
Right.
Didn't make any sense whatsoever. And he, as long as we're going to do this, let's figure out how to be unique with it. And it gets warm so quickly. How can we figure this thing out to where it would stay cooler much longer? So we had this brilliant idea that we sell a certain amount of our water through the freezer. So just stick full bottles of water into the freezer, and then that way it would stay cold almost all day long. It didn't occur to them that it becomes almost entirely undrinkable as a solid brick, and they would explode in the expand and explode in the freezer. But it took them the better part of a couple of months to figure out that wasn't really a great idea.
What did you think when you were watching that happen?
It was I just stepped back and watched and just kind of smiled.
Enjoyed it. Yeah,
absolutely.
It's tough to argue. I mean, when you have that much success, though, when he wants to try something, he has full runway to do so. I mean, look at the success that he had built so far. And that's, you have a quote here, and your father gave you a mission, and we found this online, is to be aggressive and to try to keep abreast of the only constant is change.
Right.
I love that.
Well, and we've never been afraid to try new things, and actually we've been cutting edge even on a national basis on some different concepts. Through the 80s, we pioneered gasol, which of course is 10% ethanol in
right.
fuel, and of course now you don't. across the country, Nebraska is one of the few places that you can buy gasoline without ethanol in it.
Yeah.
And even though we were one of the pioneers, the unique factor on that is that we've always given people in the city of Lincoln a choice
Right.
of your fuel with or without ethanol today, sir. And and people have developed opinions. Most other states, they've just thrown 10% ethanol in the fuel. They don't even let their customers know that the product even contains it. But we're a unique customer base here in Nebraska. We pioneered that. Another thing that we pioneered along with Networks Nebraska is being able to pay for your fuel with plastic at the fuel island. And it was a new concept in the early 80s called the debit card, bank card. They didn't call it a debit card, but every bank had their own little debit card, and most of them across the country were just on their own networks. But here in Nebraska, we had Network Nebraska, which was one of the first in the country. We didn't have anything to do with it, but they came to us and said, we want to start marketing gasoline through a capture system on the gasoline island, entirely unheard of at the time. And so we'd have a separate card reader on the islands and identify what pump you were at, and go back to that, go to the central location, put in your debit card, and be able to pay for your fuel that way. And so that was the beginning of what we now refer to as CRINs, card reader in the dispenser. And of course, now that's the only way people pay for their fuel for the most part.
Incredible.
And again, we help pioneer that concept.
Think about that. Something that we completely take it, for granted today didn't used to be a thing at all. I mean,
we do, and it's
of.
kind of a side note. We had kind of a funny thing about 10 years ago at one of our national conferences. They gave a statistic that 70% of 25-year-olds today don't know that you can go inside a store to pay for your fuel.
It's incredible.
They've grown up with the mentality that you pull up to the dispensary and you put your plastic in the dispenser, and boom, you're done.
You're training an audience, right?
Yeah,
you're training
exactly.
a customer, and that's and I know if my dad was sitting in my chair right now, I grew up on a farm. We farm corn and soybeans, so he'd be thanking you for sure for specifically with the ethanol piece, because that's a huge part of our market as corn growers.
What was fascinating, well, you mentioned that, and what was fascinating, especially in the early years of the 80s, the most reluctant group of people to buy their fuel with ethanol in it was the farmers, and that's an interesting irony. Right. We still sell gasoline off the tank truck to farmers, and throughout the 80s, no one wanted to have ethanol in their gasoline.
Just because they thought it was going to ruin their engines?
Yeah.
Or what? Yeah.
And that was the day of carburetors, and there was an adjustment period there that ethanol played havoc on a vehicle that had been used to using regular gasoline for so long. It cleaned the varnish off the side of the tank and the lines, and sometimes gunked things up,
right.
and created problems. But we've had fuel injection now for over 30 years, I think, and that's become a thing of the past.
Interesting. So what have you done? What was kind of your first steps when you got into the business? You said when you were a teenager, your dad said, "We have the greatest business in the world." What did you do from that point forward when you were that teenager? What was your next steps?
Well, every summer was a different experience for me, starting in the 5th grade, as I mentioned earlier. And I went through a lot of different facets of the business. And when I got to my college years and coming back, I started getting a lot more into sales. And I started off at Kansas State University, and for what a college degree is worth, it's worth more in the same community that you do business in. So I transferred back to the University of Nebraska, but I was working so much, and I've got dyslexia, so some of the school thing came a little tougher for me. But after 2 semesters of that, I ended up dropping out entirely, and was full-time salesman, calling on the dealers. We really weren't into the convenience store business at that point. We had a couple of self-service locations or mini service locations at the time, but that wasn't really an area of focus. And then it occurred to me that I wanted to get my college degree, and my heart was kind of with some of my friends in the culture back in Manhattan. So I went back and finished up in a semester, and then when I came back, it was my responsibility to get our first convenience store off the ground.
Really?
And that was over at 27th and South Street. And learning curve, because I'd been engulfed in the wholesale business my entire life, and that's what I knew. And my dad had perceptions of what the retail business was from his perspective in the wholesale level his entire life. And so we butted heads a couple of times on philosophies on what was workable, what wasn't workable, but we got through that. It was kind of funny. They really didn't have distributors for the in-store merchandise. There was only one or two of them, and the main one we didn't really want to do business with, and so we ended up getting all of our food items from AWG, which is a grocery wholesaler, through Ideal Grocery. Mm-hmm. So we'd drive our pickup truck over to Ideal Grocery, where they would drop off our delivery once a week, and then we'd haul it ourselves back over to the store. And if we wanted to take Campbell's bean with bacon soup, we had to do it in a 48-count case. And out of a convenience store, it takes quite a while to sell 48 cans of soup. So, again, it was a learning experience and a fascinating one. My father also had this perspective that the only way you could make it in a convenience store business if you were single-staffed 24 hours a day. And that included the manager. So what that meant for my regiment was from 7 o'clock to 3 o'clock every day, I'd go in and open the store, including the very first ad. They'd like to describe that one. That was bizarre. Being in the wholesale business, we had worked hard to stock all the shelves, get everything ready for opening day. Not much fanfare with it, but I go in and I flip the light switch on, and the only thing I could hear were the ballasts from all the fluorescent lights. Right. Short of that, there wasn't another sound in the store. And it just occurred to me, what if nobody shows up? Here we've gone through all this work, and I don't have any foundation of convenience store business to know whether or not anything we really would try would work. But that was a scary moment, that very first day. But again, I was there by myself, working from 7 o'clock to 3 o'clock, and then from 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock, I would go back down to the office and do all of the backroom work, including all the accounts receivable, not much accounts receivable, but accounts payable, payroll, do all the bookwork from the day before. And then I would go home and grab something to eat, and then I'd go back to the store because, again, everything was single-staffed, so it's restocking the shelves and that sort of thing. Would have to restock the shelves, and so that was a daily routine for me for the first year and a half, and from 7 o'clock in the morning till 9 or 10 at night, and then just wake up the next morning and start all over again. And I'll tell you what, I loved it. I absolutely loved it. It was fun. I had a mindset as well on the weekends where an employee would need to take time off. Rather than paying overtime and or trying to schedule, I would work those shifts as well. So, right. But I wasn't married and at the time, and so enjoyed it. And when you're in retail, there's a mindset that you really feed off of the personalities of everybody that comes in through the door.
Interesting.
And that is one of the things that drives you every day, is feeding off those personalities that come in, interacting with them, building that relationship with them. That's the kind of mentality that 400 of our associates have each and every day. That work in every one of our stores, is that they feed off those personalities, and they are a major factor in what differentiates our stores from others. And as I often tell people, one of my lines that I liked working with when I hired people is that you will enjoy this job whether you like it or not. And
That's great.
And I said that tongue in cheek, but with them, and I always followed it up with a smile. But I said, if this isn't where you want to be, it's pretty difficult for you to convince somebody coming in through that front door this is where they ought to be.
Right. It's contagious.
And it is contagious. And enjoy your work. Enjoy the customers that come in through the front door. And that's as much of the part of their job description as anything else that they do. Keying things into the register, balancing their drawer, doing the rest of that. Enjoying what they do and differentiating us from the competition is their principal focus,
right,
and principal responsibility.
Interesting. And you're
I
growing
forgot what the
up.
original question
What's
was.
that? No, my question was when you got started, what were you doing? And so you were working in these stores, you were cutting your teeth, you were stocking shelves, working, 16, 18-hour days, it sounds like. These were time when you were learning.
Yes.
And so after, as you continue to grow that piece of it, you have more and more employees. Talk about the growth and what it was like to transition from, having this massive, your dad's massive wholesale world, and then you having this one convenience shop. And how did you start to change that? What was that like?
Well, it became obvious to both of us that this was going to be the trend that was going to take over the industry. And with the first store, it was selling unbranded gasoline at an incredibly competitive rate versus the quality fuel of our dealer locations under the Phillips flag, and the full service of the gasoline experience that they received in those locations. And that was our mindset during the early '80s when we opened this. As I moved back into the office, we opened up our second store at 17th and Q Street, and this one we decided to brand Phillips. It was a nicer store. We put a little deli into it. People might scratch their head as they drive by this store today. What were they thinking when they designed this store? We had two dispensers, which the 7-Eleven concept, which we kind of copied at that point, was two dispensers out front, and they really weren't much larger than that. And we wanted to be known as a self-service convenience location with quality fuel through a quality location. There's something about a mindset of a gasoline facility being dirty,
Right.
and we wanted to overcome that. So we kind of thought that the one of the ways to do that is to maybe make it look more like a drive-in bank.
Yeah.
And so if you drive by that today, it kind of looks like a drive-in bank. We cantilevered the canopy over the front two gasoline islands.
Yeah. And where's the location at again?
17th and Q by campus.
Okay. 17th and Q. Got it.
By campus. And the intention there was very deliberate to attach it to the building and extend it out,
Yeah.
to make it look a lot more like a convenience store type of a mentality. And
It's inviting. It's inviting is what it is, because you feel way comfortable going inside because there's an awning all the way to the store.
right,
It's raining, snowing, whatever. You can just walk in dry.
right.
Yeah.
So we did that location. We modified an old dealer location at 83rd and O Street, where we leased out the service bays and just made this little teeny tiny convenience store and did self-service gasoline up front. Actually, we did that with a dealer that had been there that wanted to focus only on his repair work and didn't want to mess with any of the rest of it. So it was a good opportunity to do that. And actually, that relationship worked really pretty well. But we redid our two mini service locations. They used to be called U-Saves, and we built those into convenience stores, 10th and J Street and 84th and Highway 6.
Yeah.
I smile when I think of the old 84th and Highway 6 location. I called that a modified tough shed that we threw some candy bars and coolers into, and we did about 3 or 4 different expansions on it before we finally raised it entirely about 8 years ago and built the facility we've got out there right now. But so that was our portfolio of locations when my father gave my sisters and I the opportunity to buy them out. Mm-hmm. And what was fascinating about that prospect was that there were exterior forces at work in our industry. During the 80s was when the EPA began to crack down on underground storage tanks, leaking underground storage tanks, and how those were dealt with. They flipped a switch like that and just changed the industry overnight. They indicated that the way you handled replacing an underground storage tank throughout the history of the industry, you're not going to do it that way anymore. It used to be you replaced a tank, you pulled the old tank out of the ground, you put the new tank in. Now they said you will clean up anything that leaked from that tank prior to it, and but never mind the fact that we can't define what clean is.
Oh, so
it was just an open checkbook,
right?
And so within just a couple of years, there was not an insurance company in the country that would write underground storage tank insurance. So consequently, we had 100 storage tanks, gasoline tanks, all across town. Most of them were substantial age because we'd been in the business for quite a while.
Long time. Yeah.
And we'd replace tanks as needed, but not anything to that level. And so we just dealt with them one by one as they came up, and we ended up falling into a classification with the EPA of 100 tanks or more, which meant we had to meet financial responsibility for those underground storage tanks before most of the rest of the market did. At 100 tanks and more, you fit this category. Less, you had another 2 years.
So you overnight,
so
seemingly overnight,
we went into this thing
changes.
And we got into trouble with the EPA. We ended up going out and signing a contract with an insurance company that we knew did not have the backing to cover releases, but it satisfied the EPA, and that's all the EPA cared about. And so we lit a match to the $40,000 or whatever it was, the money that we gave them for premiums, mm-hmm. knowing they wouldn't be able to cover anything.
Right.
But it satisfied the EPA at the time. So it was under that mindset that my father had assets in the business, and that would be nice for him to get out. Plus, I was bullish overall on the petroleum business, and so he wanted to give me an opportunity, and my sisters as well. Neither one of my two sisters are involved in the business, but gave them an opportunity to get in from an equity position. Each one of them owned 24%, and myself 52% as the operating partner. And so it was that mindset that we went into buying my father out.
Right. And
that was in 1989. And from there, it's been an interesting growth period since then. We had to replace every tank we had in our system before the end of 1998. Every state across the country started doing funds that the petroleum industry paid money into the fund, and in the fund helped go towards remediation.
Right.
Remediation, they use a term called Rebecca, which was risk-based assessment, and which was good to have. And it was kind of interesting. Once the state was on the line for the cleanup, they set cleanup parameters. Didn't have to clean up to zero. And they also would prioritize which sites came on
Right.
as the highest priority sites.
Which would make way more sense than just saying, oh, you have more than 100, you can eat this cost now.
Right.
Right.
Exactly. And so it made it much more workable.
Mm-hmm.
And so we, I'm probably rambling a little bit here, but soon after we bought my father out, we did 2 construction projects. One was 27th and East Street, but the main one was 56th and Old Cheney. And that was a fun project. We swallowed awfully hard on that one because it was our number one dealer location. But we also recognized that was an area of town, a demographic that a nice convenience store would do very well at.
Right.
So we ended up having to negotiate with the dealer to find a different alternative there, and then we built far and away our most aggressive location. We did a site analysis that indicated that would do about 200,000 gallons a month, which was absolutely unheard of.
Unbelievable. 200,000 gallons of
200,000 gallons a month. And our dealers, as an example, a good one will do 30,000 gallons per month. A decent convenience store at that time would do 70, 80,000 gallons. A really good one would do 100,000. But this was projected, and we didn't really fully believe that. We put in 4 dispensers, and within the first month of operations, we were doing 330,000 gallons per month out of that location. For a while, we set up the outside islands as full service, and we'd have somebody run on out and give them full service because that was our number one full service dealer location. We thought that might resonate with a higher income area that this was located in. And as it turned out, there wasn't any availability at any of the other dispensers. And these dispensers on the outside that were priced 20 cents a gallon higher were ones that they pulled up to. They didn't even want the full service. It was kind of you pay 20 cents a gallon for the opportunity not to have to wait at the other ones.
But the big thing that I'm seeing, Mark, is that you gave people a choice.
Right.
You gave them options. And I think that that's really important for people that are starting businesses, that you can't back people in a corner and give them a binary answer. You need to give them options no matter what it is. In our world, it's contracts. Like, people want to know, do I have to do 1 video or can I do 4 videos, or where do I have to line up to be, to work with you guys?
Right.
People love options. They need it.
Exactly. And so then to expand the history of this location further, it wasn't long after that we added 2 more dispensers, and then and even then we didn't know how long this was going to last because we'd never experienced anything like this. And
330,000 a month.
330,000 per month. And then we expanded the canopy over those 2 dispensers. We bit the bullet and did that. And then for a year, or for a couple of years, actually, we averaged almost 450,000 gallons per month out of that location. And it was a great opportunity. And it resonated well with the people in the area. It was the best alternative for the people in that area. And then, you make business decisions to try to perpetuate those sorts of things, but sometimes you stub your toe. And what happened next was a great example of stubbing your toe with the best intentions. The dispensers, after 5 or 6 years, had already gotten quite a bit of wear and tear because of the volume, but they were still good enough to move to a different location. But why wouldn't we want to put the newest and the best dispensers at our number one location? So we bought 6 new dispensers, and we put them in at those locations. But at that location, but they were so new that they didn't work.
What do you mean?
They didn't communicate with our point of sale equipment, with our cash registers. And it didn't communicate well, and things would go down, and it became an absolute nightmare.
So your
and
best location.
Our best location.
Turning
And
on
we
that
lost, overnight, we lost 100,000 gallons per month just because it was no longer the best alternative for an awful lot of people.
And from that point forward, have you taken the motto of "It's not broke, don't fix it"? Is that
not entirely?
Yeah.
I make sure that we've tested
Right.
the hardware that we end up putting in one of our locations. I think I've tried to make sure that it is a little bit more reliable, but I'm never going to stop throwing things up against the wall to see what sticks.
It's the cost of innovation.
Yeah.
Because your competitor may be those other alternatives across town, they may have stuck with those exact same pumps. They may have stuck with that exact same software and everything, but you saw where it was going, just like your dad did. And you're like, we got to try this. We got to keep moving ahead, staying ahead of our competitors.
I think a common term in everybody's industry is disruptive behaviors.
Right.
That occasionally a competitor, or hopefully you, can come up with a concept that's difficult to replicate.
Right.
And that is an eye opener for your competition, you keep trying those things. Some work, some don't.
Mm-hmm. And so for you, talk to me about what that looks like today. Now you guys have how many locations today?
We've got 24 U-stops, 30 total.
30 total. Wow, that's incredible. So if you're getting gas in Lincoln, there's a good chance you're getting it from a U-stop location. At least they should after this.
Well, I would hope so.
Right? Yeah. We go in
every day trying to figure out how to differentiate ourselves from our competition.
And what are some things that you've seen? You don't have to talk about stuff today even, but what are the things you're doing now, looking ahead into the future to kind of start thinking about that?
Well, I'll give you a good example. Well, in my mind, what a good example is Phillips 66 has been a great alternative, a great partner for us. Mm-hmm. My father's uncle actually was the chairman of Phillips right after Frank Phillips himself.
Oh.
And so our history with Phillips is deep-rooted. When my dad got finished playing basketball with the Cornhuskers, AAU basketball was a better alternative than the NBA was at the time. It was pre-television.
Right.
So it's the same attributes that made a great competitor on the basketball court made a great corporate executive trainee. So yeah. Caterpillar, Chevrolet, Phillips, an awful lot of these companies would have their own AAU basketball team. And so he played for the 66ers. Just before he got there, the 66ers won the Industrial League and represented the United States in the Olympics.
Wow.
And so that was kind of a cool deal. But anyway, we've had this long-standing relationship, and they've been a great partner, and they continue to try to figure out how to remain relevant in an ever-changing environment as well.
Mark, you mentioned a little bit about like having dyslexia, and yet you're in business. You're really successful. You're crushing it. You have for a long time. So how did you find out you had that, and then how did you deal with it once you knew?
Well, it survived. I was in school for a number of years, actually, before it was identified. Originally, I went to kindergarten and first grade at Irving, and then my first grade teacher brought my parents in and said Mark would benefit from taking first grade again. Mm-hmm. And in order to kind of deal with that stigma a little bit and to smooth it over a little bit, I moved to Sheridan. Mm-hmm. None of this had really been identified at that point. But once I got into middle school, they put a label on it. It's called dyslexia, which basically means that I don't internalize the written word quite the same way, or even imagery. It's sometimes described as flipping it backwards, mm-hmm. But I don't see it that way because that's the way I've always viewed things.
You read it.
But what it does mean is that reading is difficult. I read I did do an Evelyn Wood reading class once, and that was helpful to an extent in terms of recognizing that you can absorb an entire page and then quicker than what you give your mind credit for. But in my case, I cannot scan a page and internalize it. I pretty much have to read every word.
So do I.
On
Yeah,
that
I
page.
absolutely am like that.
And so, shoot, it's 5 minutes per page. When I'm reading something, and that becomes incredibly laborious and difficult. That's one of the reasons I don't enjoy reading fiction as much as others. But it's just something that you learn to deal with, and what ends up happening is if you've got centralized focus, if you're focused in achieving something, you figure out ways around it, and you work that much harder at it. And I think I worked a little bit harder at some of the things I've achieved, and when you do that, you get a lot more out of it. But that is a common thread, though, between an awful lot of people that have got dyslexia, and there might be a trigger there as well that makes people with dyslexia pretty successful. I'm a member of a group, or was a member of a group called Young Presidents Organization. It's an international organization with chapters in different states and regions. I was a member of the Nebraska chapter, and at one of the universities that they were holding, they were tasked with doing a skit. And Mark LeBaron shared this with me. Mark LeBaron was the leader of this group, and it was kind of like reading or herding cats. He handed out all these scripts to all these corporate executives, probably about 6 of them that were in there, and expected everybody to just read their script and do this thing. And it turned out that 3 out of the 6 had this issue, had dyslexia, and so they could not read the script as readily as most others could, and they figured out a way around it, and actually they did better with their exercise than most others. And in fact, that's also probably a contributing factor as to why they were successful in their businesses as well. And the fact that I view the world through a little bit different lens, maybe than some of those other people, maybe that helps in some ways.
Richard Branson has dyslexia.
Really?
I found that really interesting. That was one of the first. That was one of the first people I had ever heard of coming out and talking about like how it helped him. He had over 300 companies. Has over 300 companies over the Virgin name, and he talked about openly about that exact same thing, about how, look, I may not look at things the same way, but I have a fresh view on them every single time I look at it because my retention is so bad.
Right.
And there's just really something really interesting about that, especially when they ended up doing better with it than if you would have just had them read it black and white on the page.
Well, and I will credit dyslexia with my inability to remember names. And the way I describe it to some people is I get to go new places and see new people every day. But right. It's a horrible thing. And to get personal with you, you mentioned your name to me 2 or 3 times before it really sank in.
Yeah.
And so I have to work a little harder. I have to work harder than some people do, and it's not as obvious.
But that's the point, though, right? Is you have to work a little harder, and that is something I think that you internalize if you have some sort of either reading disability or learning disability, is that you have to work harder than everyone else, and it's like an automatic chip on your shoulder, thinking like, I'm going to outwork you because I have to. That's the piece.
Well, and the other thing as well, my Myers-Briggs, I'm an ISTJ.
Okay.
And what I'm off the charts on in those 2 categories is introvert and thinker. I'm a very strong introvert, and a lot of people would question that.
I am questioning it right now. I think you're doing great. I think you're doing amazing.
And I've had to bull my way through that. Yeah. My father was a strong extrovert, And again, I mentioned earlier in the program how much I idolized him and how much I loved growing up in his shadow. And getting in neck deep into his environment on a regular basis helped get some of my outward tendencies out there, and that really helped.
Yeah.
The other part is thinking rationally on my decisions, as opposed to being overly influenced by feelings.
Right.
And I think I'm able to make more objective decisions, and I don't know really whether or not that's has anything to do with the dyslexia component of that, but I'd like to think that I'm a rational decision maker by the facts, as opposed to letting feelings interject what would otherwise be a rational decision.
Were you like that early, or was that something that you developed over time?
I guess I didn't recognize it early. I've developed it. I've focused on it. Again, I want to make the right decisions based on the facts presented.
Mm-hmm. Right. One thing I've taken a lot of time in, invested in recently, is just emotional intelligence. So actively taking classes right now on emotional intelligence, EQ, finding out how I can, better relate to the people I work with every day, and just learn how to positively interact with them inside of those environments, and what we need to do to create an environment of stability and trust as in a startup, which is, kind of difficult to do at times.
Right.
That's something that I've been spending a lot of time on specifically. And I noticed that there's a piece of it that, there's a piece of it that you're not born with. And then there's, like, for instance, you said not a born extrovert, but you put yourself in the environment, you immersed yourself to make sure you had some of those skills. And I think that's really important. As you've touched a lot on innovation, staying ahead of things, constantly never-ending improvement is, a term that, like, Kaizen from the Toyota production system, constant never-ending improvements. You guys are always trying to find ways to better yourself. What other things have you done to improve yourself as a leader? And what are some, like, great books that you've read or people that you've really looked up to, other than your dad, as you've been growing this business?
Oh, I don't do a great deal of reading. I'm not a big fan of fiction, but
Me neither.
one of the inspirational books that I've read are a couple of them from Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged, and Fountainhead.
What did you like about Atlas Shrugged?
Loved it. It almost defines a libertarian, and I'm a conservative, and it really kind of, even though that book was set in the 50s, if you read it today, you would swear that you were living in 2020. Mm-hmm. In terms of the mentality of all the different characters in the book, and the reality of the main characters that were singularly focused on bringing value. Mm-hmm. Creating value, creating worth, and to the extent that they created worth for other individuals, they became successful, and that's really kind of a mentality that I try to subscribe to each and every day. When I describe coming into the office and differentiating ourselves from our competition, what that really means is I want a customer to wake up in the morning and have them see value in coming to my location. To the extent that I can create value to those individuals, we're going to win the game. We're going to win their business. If I can't create value for that individual, then I'm not going to be around. What's fascinating, I enjoy talking to young groups of kids when I have an opportunity. I've sometimes had the opportunity with entrepreneur class through LPS and through some junior achievement opportunities. A question I love to ask is, what's the purpose of business? And immediately hands will come up and say, "Well, to make money."
Make money. Right.
And I said, "All right, anybody anybody here disagree with it?" Nope, to make money. I said, "All right." I said, "I'm around 30 individuals here that all they're in this economics class that want to make their way in the business world. Why is it that only 1 or 2% of you will be successful at operating your own business? Why is it that 50% of businesses fail within the first year? 95% of businesses aren't around after 10 years. Is it because none of them wanted to make money?"
That's
No.
great. Yeah.
No.
It's a great point.
And I've mentioned it several different times. The
Wow.
purpose of business is to create value for others. And to the extent that you're able to do that, you're allowed to survive and stay in business. It's fascinating to me that the cynical view of some of the people out there is the greed of entrepreneurs, and they're all in it for the money. If people were in it just for the money, they wouldn't survive it. Nobody succeeds that hasn't improved somebody else's life. Nobody succeeds that doesn't create value for others. And that transcends itself, and regardless of what you do. If you're a social worker,
Yeah.
you're there to create value for others.
Mm-hmm.
That's what drives you.
Right.
That's what you do. An entrepreneur isn't any different, but they just get recognized immediately
As greedy.
by the buying decisions and by the economics of the marketplace as to whether or not they're allowed to survive. And to the extent that they create that value, they have the opportunity to be around tomorrow.
That is an incredible read on business and entrepreneurship. I mean, I've never heard it put like that before. I've heard my good friend Tim Clare say, I'm not aiming to be successful. I'm aiming to be of value. I'm aiming to help bring value to others. And that's the only other place that I've heard that. And obviously, speaking to two very successful people, that's what you're going to find. And people that have seen people in business and been around people in business for decades, not they have a startup for 5 years and they burn through all their money. Mm-hmm. That's the difference. Is you guys are constantly trying to add value, not only through your businesses, but you yourself literally add value into the community every single day. I've got a list here. I mean, you're on the board of Lincoln Parks and Rec Foundation, Madonna, the Community Foundation, Boy Scouts of America, Girl Scouts of America, Nebraska State Environmental Quality Council. That's just a couple of them.
Yeah, they're throughout different parts of my career, yes.
Right, but those are the things.
I've weaned off of a couple of those, but yeah, but you're right. You are correct.
That's the things that you have been involved in throughout the years. And talk about, I was an Eagle Scout. Actually had the opportunity to get that when I was a young kid, and that was a really big part of my life and establishing my core values as a person. What have you gleaned from your involvement in all of these awesome foundations?
It kind of goes, it's all intertwined into a philosophy that I have a different way of saying what we've been talking about. Give a man a fish, he eats for a day. Teach a man to fish, he eats for a lifetime. Mm-hmm. And there's the common thread between Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, Junior Achievement, all these different organizations that I've enjoyed being a part of, Big Brothers Big Sisters, has been setting a foundation in these young kids' life to move forward and to build on, and to see what success can look like, and to make something of themselves, to have purpose in their life, to something to get up out of bed in the morning for. I mean, I never have to worry about that. No. I wake up early every morning, and most of it with a smile on my face, and with a sense of purpose, and getting out there, and I get to do what I do, and I love what I do, and it's fun. If I have the opportunity to go back to what we were talking about before, on what the purpose of business is, you expand that down into what the purpose of an individual business is. And typically that's kind of almost defined like a mission statement, really, when you think about it. And most mission statements incorporate some of those ideas. But what's the purpose of the job of the individual employee? And going down to that rationale, when you do it from a perspective of creating value, differentiating your business from the competition, when I talk about my young associates, sometimes it's a second or third job they've ever had. So they don't have much of a foundation coming forward. Their job isn't to ring things into the cash register. It's not to clean the floor. It's not to do any wide variety of tasks that they may view their job. Their job is to differentiate U-Stop from every other alternative out there to the customers that come in through that door. Now that means accurately ringing things into the register, because if we can't count for cash flow coming in, then we don't survive. It means cleaning the floors. It means greeting every customer with a smile. Everything relates back to everything that they do. They need to. It's so helpful if they can find a common thread as to what the purpose of their job is, and which is closely related to the purpose of the business that they're working in. So when you're going in for a job interview, as an example, study the business that you're going in to apply for, figure out what it is that they do, and figure out how you're going to create value for them. Figure out what it is within your skill set that's going to fit in with what your perception of what their company mantra is, what's your perception of why their customers come to that business. And I guarantee you, if you do that in a thoughtful way during that job interview, you're going to separate yourself from the competition.
Absolutely. Yeah, I had an example like that the other day where there was an opportunity where somebody had the ability to say something like that to me, or they were in a position to where we were looking to hire them. And I actively looked for that. I actively thought to myself, how is this person going to change our business for the better? And then I also put it back on myself. I'm like, how am I going to change their life? How am I going to make their life better? Maybe it's stable income. Maybe it's personal development. You know, Grindstone here, one of the biggest things that we focus on as a company is personal development. If you're not growing every single day, you shouldn't be here. And if we don't give you the agency and facilitate that growth, then we shouldn't be here. And that's exactly how I live from an employee perspective, providing value. And then for the customers, it's the same as you. I mean, we don't deserve to be in business if we don't provide value to the customer. If we can't get them something, fix their problems, provide a solution for them, we don't deserve to be in business. So it makes me feel really good that like I have some of those thoughts earlier. And then I hear, you confirm those after your decades of experience.
Well, I'm glad you got that affirmation from me.
Yeah, no, I really am grateful for that. And I've got a lot of great people that I've had a chance to interview here. Like I said before, your involvement in the community is just everywhere. And I want to highlight one thing here, specifically with the story of the Salt Creek tiger beetle. Tell me this story, because this is an interesting one, because a lot of people don't know about this, but I'd love to share it.
Oh, it's a fun one to reflect on. My father bought that property when he still owned the company.
Which property?
I'm sorry, 27th and I-80. There had not been an interchange built out there yet.
27th and I-80. So what's out there right now? Give people an idea.
Well, there's U-Stop out there.
Mainly you got a U-Stop.
A lot of auto dealers. A lot of auto dealers on the west side.
Whitehead Circle, isn't it?
Whitehead Drive.
Whitehead Drive.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
And so it was an 80-acre wetlands that the owner had used it as a duck blind. They had not built the interchange out there yet. The seller disclosed the fact that this was a wetlands, and my father made a phone call into the city to ask them, okay, can you develop in a floodplain? And well, they said, yeah, under certain set of circumstances, sure, you can develop into a floodplain. And he went ahead and bought the property, not knowing the difference between a floodplain and a wetlands. And so it was a rude awakening when we found out later that this was not only a wetlands, but this was a saline wetlands. There are very few inland areas in the United States that have got saltwater wetlands. And Lincoln's one of them. In fact, we were founded with salt. I think you probably knew that already, but because of the salt characteristics that existed here, that was one of the main reasons that initial settlers came into this area. But
I
anyway,
didn't know that, actually.
So we started in with the development process. Bus said, have at it, Mark, and go develop this. And I think he still had a mindset that we were going to be able to develop 80 acres of development out there.
And how old were you at this time?
Well, I was in the company, and I was early 30s.
Early 30s. So your dad's like, go develop this ground.
Yeah,
I don't care what you got to do.
Get out there and develop it. And so started working with Mark Hunziker, our development attorney, and going through some of the initial phases. And person after person kept telling me, you can't develop there. It's a saline wetlands. And so we identified a front sliver of the property that they did do a little bit of farming on, and actually the rest of the property they grazed cattle on. Mm-hmm. It was actually technically referred to as a drained, stable saline wetlands, and the fact that it was stable still made it very valuable to the environmentalists and conservationists in that it's in its potential. So we identified a 404B permit. We applied to the Fish and Wildlife Commission, Corps of Engineers, for a 404B permit to be able to reclaim a little bit more of the wetlands. But the biggest factor here is to try to figure out how to create a win-win for everybody. Mm-hmm. On this. And we identified more wetlands off to our south. And so there was another 60 acres or so that we purchased there that actually got us a whole contiguous wetlands. And it also gave us some developable property, residential developable property to the east side of that lot. We worked with Jerry Schleich with Home Realty at the time. One of the roadblocks that we developed here was the fact that we would have to wait 5 years and $5 million to bring sewer to this property. And it was incredibly frustrating because there was a sewer line not very far apart, but it was just too deep.
Right.
Part of the irony was we needed to bring in an awful lot of dirt onto our property. So we worked out a deal with Jerry Schleich to borrow dirt with excavators down through his property, and we would give him the back piece of residential property. That's the business he was in, developing housing. And all he needed to do for us was let us borrow his dirt and give us an easement across his property for this sewer. So we borrowed this dirt and cut this swath through that property that got the real estate down low enough that we were able to use that sewer line. And so we saved the city 5 years and $5 million to be able to do that. In the meantime, as well, we constructed the entire development so that no runoff would go on to this wetlands area. And again, I describe it as wetlands. It was a cow pasture.
Right.
But it was an awful lot of people were emotional about it and saw the potential. So we actually went to the Lower Platte South Natural Resource District, and we donated the wetlands to them. They got a $200,000 grant to shore up the hedge cuts that was draining it into the Little Salt Creek behind it, and redeveloped it back into a wetlands. And what we would ordinarily think is that storm runoff, if it was filtered and that sort of thing, would be good for a wetlands.
Right.
No, they didn't want any fresh water to be introduced to this wetlands other than what fell on it with rain.
Interesting.
And so, well, we developed the entire project that way. I hold this thing out as a great win-win scenario for a variety of different interest groups. Jerry Schleich was able to get some additional building ground. We saved the city $5 million in 5 years on developing this. The sewer line allowed development on both sides of 27th Street.
Wow.
And so everything that you see out at 27th and I-80 right now feeds off of the same sewer line that we're able to put in through here. And we ended up, the Natural Resources District has got an award called the Master Conservationalist Award. We were the first corporation in the history of this award to ever receive that distinction because of our efforts to be able to make this saline wetlands happen. And then, of course, we got the opportunity to build a convenience store.
Right.
And we've got an ongoing working relationship with the Natural Resources District. The Boy Scouts, one of the Eagle Scouts did a project out there, put a little gazebo viewing area out there to see it and kind of advertise the unique nature of a saline wetlands in Lincoln, Nebraska.
Right. And none of that's possible if you're just the developer that just bull rushes everything and says, you know what, we're just going to build this and you're just going to have to deal with it. Because a lot of what happens, I would assume, in developing on the edge of a city is whatever you got to do, just make it happen, and we're going to develop this.
Well, and the conservationists were going to dig their heels in and said, no, you won't.
Yeah.
And nobody gets anywhere.
And yeah, exactly.
And so we, again, we hold this out as a great example of what can happen when you take a can-do attitude. We didn't. Easiest thing would have been to just walk away from this, and just say it can't be done.
Right.
But Mark Hunziker came up with some great ideas along through the process on this thing, and we thought outside the box, and we were able to make this development happen.
That's incredible. Yeah, and then in the process, the Salt Creek tiger beetle, which is the only, they can only live in saline wetlands, right? They ended up surviving.
Well, from what I've been told, the only place on earth that the Salt Creek tiger beetle exists is right here.
Huh.
In
Lancaster
County.
In the process of building a gas station and a convenience store on North 27th, you allowed the city to save $5 million. You created new development opportunities. You got the conservationists what they wanted, and you saved a species.
Exactly.
That's incredible.
Exactly.
Like, that's awesome. But that's goes back to your whole point with creating value. You created value for 5 parties there,
right? Not
just yourself. And I think that's what allows you to be consistently successful in the market, is just this constant focus on bringing value to people. And I took a lot away from that. That's really interesting to me. So I appreciate you sharing that insight.
Well, you're welcome. You're welcome. It's in every day you end up finding something new and discovering something different, and you never have it figured out. The company that, going back to more of a macro perspective, the company that I run today bears absolutely no resemblance to the one my father ran. And it continues to evolve while I'm there. We need fresh ideas. I've got 2 daughters. Mm-hmm. One just graduated from college, is with Hormel right now, and the other one's going to be a sophomore at Kansas State. And if they so choose to go into the business, or whoever we pass this business on, I can assure you that the company that they run will bear no resemblance to the one I'm running right now.
Right.
we're continue to evolve. We're building a brand new location that we break ground on next week, actually, at 75th and Pine Lake behind Home Depot.
Nice.
And this will be far and away the nicest convenience store in the city of Lincoln. We will have a full tunnel wash with it that will compete with Jet Splash, favorably with Jet Splash. It will have a food service concept that will be rather unique. We will have charging stations for electric vehicles.
Huge.
You talk about evolving. We don't know what the next 10 years will bring.
No.
I think an awful lot of people are betting that electric vehicles will be part of that mix. If it is, we want to be part of that equation.
Exactly.
And again, that is all part of continuing to figure out what's next.
Yeah. That's a great location. I know exactly what you're talking about. I drive that almost every day to go to the gym. So I remember driving up there and I saw that blank lot and I wondered if that was going to be. So now it's interesting knowing it's you. But what other advice would you have for entrepreneurs that want to get started? Whether they've got a family business or they're going out on their own for the first time, what advice would you give them today?
You've got to determine why somebody else is going to forsake every other opportunity they have to come and purchase what you're going to offer. And you've got to have that revolutionary idea. There have been authors, and I can't remember who the famous author is, that indicated that if you do something, be the best in the world at it. Mm-hmm. But that might be a little bit more aggressive than what I would feel. You at least need to be the best in the market that you're going to be competing in. Mm-hmm. And recognize that you never get things figured out. Things will continue to evolve. So just when you think you've got an answer to something, somebody else is going to come up with a better mousetrap. You're going to need to respond to that and or come up with another disruptive behavior of your own that's going to revolutionize. And that's what makes this the greatest country in the world. Is the entrepreneurial spirit that's out there, that this mindset that people go out there creating value to differentiate their own business, fighting for your business, is what continues to expand and innovate. 10 years ago, who would have nobody even heard of an iPhone 10 years ago or so. And it's revolutionized the industry.
Right.
And so they're going to continue to be those innovations moving out there. And there are going to be opportunities available for those people willing to think outside the box and willing to figure out that next big thing.
That's awesome. That's a great way to end the episode. Mark, thank you so much, dude. I appreciate you sharing this insight with us and with our listeners. I know this is a huge note-taking episode for everybody, with the piece about value, I think is so solid, about bringing value to your customers and just having an obsessive focus on that. I appreciate you sharing that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And thank you very much for the opportunity.
You bet. That's going to do it for another episode of Spark to Fire, guys. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for your time and attention. Please go leave a review on iTunes and a 5-star rating. That is how we get more cool people like Mark Whitehead on the show, and that is how we get more listeners and more views on YouTube. So please give us a review there and share this on your Instagram story. Take a screenshot of the podcast and share it on Instagram and tag a friend so we can get more people listening to this show, because it just provides a ton of value to both us and them. That'll do it for another episode of Spark to Fire. I'm Landon Rhodes, your host, and keep striking.